Don't mock. I'm not a fool. And people who know me personally know that I am not a fool. But I won't get into the details of those. I just want people to realize that I'm not a fool. Don't mock. I'm not a fool. Don't mock. I'm not a fool.
Hey there and welcome. It's episode 68 of the Dumb Leaders podcast. My name's Tony Curl and I'm here to share today another story around dumb leadership. Now this came to me from a discussion that I had with a general manager of the people and culture area within a bureaucratic organisation. So it was a government-aligned organisation and they've got to follow very strict rules to make sure that they're complying with all the regulations that sit there within these organisations to actually operate. So it's a very bureaucratic process. And she was sharing some of her frustrations that she had. So this is a general manager of a people and culture division. And within this particular organisation, there was a CEO and there were other general managers. So the general managers report to the CEO. And the frustration that she was sharing was based around lack of results, lack of progress in a cultural shift program that the CEO had felt was relevant and timely for that particular organisation. And she was frustrated. They had got together as a senior leadership team. They'd worked through some values. They'd worked through some behaviours. And then since then, they had not achieved anything. There were meetings, there was dumb silences, there was puzzled looks, there was lack of accountability around any of the initiatives. And to me, it was a classic case of lip service leadership. So let me talk about lip service leadership. Lip service leadership is a classic symptom where people put energy into a strategy or a plan to make the strategy or plan look good, even though they have absolutely no intention of ever implementing that plan or strategy. And we see this in many organisations. So this particular organisation, classic example, but we see it all the time. People put together reports, put together presentations, put together strategic plans and outlooks, and have very little intention on actually delivering that process. In fact, during the COVID crisis that we're currently in, we've actually seen a number of organisations forced to actually implement the plans that they put in place for times like this. Forced to, because the crisis has forced them. But in good times, and usual times, I guess, that lack of urgency in implementing strategy, implementing change, is all too prevalent within organisations. So let me just share a little bit about the values and the behaviours that this organisation had actually worked through. They'd workshopped. It had been an incredibly productive day in which they've done this. You know, I believe it was incorporated about 6 to 9 months ago. So the CEO had approached the general manager of people and culture and had suggested that the culture within the bureaucratic organisation needed to evolve and needed to shift. And it's, you know, a good piece of awareness if you can actually understand that from a leadership perspective, that yes, this needs to happen. Now, when this particular leader was talking to me, the general manager of people and culture was talking to me, she said the values and the behaviours they came up with was awesome. And so I said, what were they? So remember, this is a bureaucratic organisation. So the first value was innovation. The first value was innovation. And she described that in respect of we needing to get out of our autopilot. So they put a description or a bit of the behaviours underneath each of these key concepts. So innovation, we need to get out of autopilot. We need to remove barriers. We need to challenge the norm. We need to have a growth mindset. Absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. She then said, we're really struggling with that one. Okay. And I sort of had a bit of a giggle because innovation and bureaucracy don't necessarily go hand in hand. They can, but they don't necessarily. The second one was about open and honest communication. So instead of people telling everyone else their problems or telling everyone else their feedback or gossiping about third parties, it was all about having the conversation yourself, being open and honest, providing feedback, all of those things that we would like to see within an organisation. And that was driven because of the observation that within this organisation, all of these leaders had grown up within the organisation. So when I say that, they were long-termers. They'd been there 20, 25 years. They'd worked together. There was an avoidance of conflict on the open, on the surface. Everyone was friendly. Everyone knew each other. And with that came this avoidance of conflict, the avoidance of constructive conversations. And that then rippled through the organisation. Conversations were friendly. So even though there were undoubtedly issues, because there's not too many organisations that can seriously say they don't have issues, undoubtedly there are issues that were never really addressed until they're unavoidable. And we all know how conflicts works. If we avoid it, one day it's just going to blow up in our face. And we've all seen it. And that's what dumb leaders do. They avoid the conflict instead of dealing with it when it's at a much more manageable level. The third value was reward and recognition. And once again, the commentary, we don't do that one very well. And the excuse that she was making for her other senior leaders was, I think they just forget about it. And then in the surveys that this particular organisation had conducted, and within, some general cultural feedback, people in respect of reward and recognition are genuinely just looking, in the vast majority of cases, to be thanked for the role and to feel value. To feel value and to be thanked. And yet, they just forget about it. The final one was accountability. Do what you say you will do. And with a real focus around leadership doing what they say they will do, or doing what they say. And once again, that's a tricky one. So each and every one of those values was then followed up by, the challenges that were being faced within the organisation in delivering. Classic case of lip service leadership. This is all about, let's put together a strategy to make someone happy because someone's been given a task and a role, but I've got no desire, I've got no intention of ever delivering on that, right? And that becomes really challenging. And from a cultural aspect, you cannot put an organization's culture is not something that you see up on the wall. It's not part of a strategic plan. It's not part of a strategic outlook that gets hidden away in a filing cabinet somewhere. The culture is what you see. It's what you breathe. It's what you observe. It's what the organizational staff do. That's the culture. So you might have a cultural strategy that is completely disconnected to the actual culture within the organisation. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing lip service leadership. We have this fantastic strategy. This is what our culture will look like. And then in reality, it is nothing like what the culture looks like. We've got surface level conversations. We've got friendships. We've got people paying lip service to the accountability and performance of the organisation. And the ongoing execution and implementation of this particular strategy has been left in the hands of one manager, the people and cultural general manager, which is absolutely absurd. And once again, the CEO has looked at this particular strategy, understood the need and the desire to have it, because organizations with good performance culture drive a 20% on average return better than organizations that don't. So there is a strong need to build a clearly defined culture. But it can't be left in the hands of one manager to implement. It can't be left in the hands of the one manager to execute. And ultimately, the person that is responsible for the culture and the culture that is actually driven within an organization is the one that is being modeled by the most senior leader. In their daily behaviors, in their daily endeavors, in the way that they behave and the way that they do their role. That's the culture the organization gets. A leader is on show every single day. And when you've got leaders not owning, giving lip service to a strategy, it's pretty clear where the problem of culture lies in this particular case. People get the culture that they model. Bottom line. People get the culture that they model. People do as people see. So how do you get out of this? How do you get out of this? It's challenging to get out of this, but you've really got to make the change. First up, the leader has to leave. The lead. Sorry, not leave. That might make it a little bit easier, but the leader has to lead in this particular situation. If the leader desires a culture of innovation, open and honest communication, reward and recognition, and accountability, they have to be the model for each and every one of those. And they have to, and the word demand is probably strong, but they have to demand that from the leaders that report to them. And that's what helps make everyone from a senior leadership aspect accountable in this. It makes them accountable. Now, ultimately, if a leader's not implementing the strategy, giving it lip service, having those dumb looks, those awkward pauses in meetings when it comes to culture, One of the suggestions that I made in this particular conversation was you've got to align what's important to that particular leader. And when I say what's important, I'm talking more than just results and performance. Every leader has their own little reward buzzers that go on within their own makeup. It could be the status that they perceive that they've got. It could be the relationships within their team that they've got. It could be the concept of autonomy. It could be having control. You know, every leader has got these things that are really important for them. And from a P&C point of view, a people and culture point of view, it's really important for that general manager to tap into and find out and discover what ultimately is important for every leader. Might be important for some leaders to remain under the radar, right? Now, I'm not saying that's a great thing. I'm saying that that's probably a pretty ordinary thing. But in finding out what's important with every leader, you can then start to tailor your conversations and your discussions with them around what is ultimately important for them. Right? So if someone's got has the importance of status as a reward response within their brain, every time that I would be talking to them about culture, I would be talking to them in relation to, I want you, obviously it's important for you to be the leading example of this. So, and really tapping into that status concept, same with control, same with whatever it is that a leader has in their psyche and their makeup that's important for them. So you need to align what's important for each and every leader. And then the other thing that I suggested, instead of having the leaders having the cultural meetings in the boardroom of the CEO, I suggested a rotating roadshow so that each leader, each general manager would have responsibility for hosting and chairing the cultural meeting, whatever the term was that they were using within the organisation, in their space. So if it was an infrastructure department, for example, the meeting would be held in the boardroom of the infrastructure. And each general manager would be expected to invite 2 or 3 leaders of their team or people that report to them to the meeting to share cultural good news stories. And ultimately what happens when you put something like that is that you are putting that leader on show. And no leader likes to fail when they're on show. So all of a sudden you build some accountability, you build some emphasis, and you start to drive the behaviours that you want. It also brings the CEO into those common areas within their organisation that they may not visit much. And it starts to build that rapport and the connection between the team. So put the leaders on show. Because the other thing that conversely starts to happen is that the other general managers aren't going to be silent in that particular meeting anyway, because all of a sudden they've got people that they would consider below them on the chain. And if they're talking up culture and they're talking up their good news stories, and the other general managers don't, so driving accountability, it's a different way to do it, but and it's not necessarily the preferred way to put people into a position where they could fail. But ultimately, if they're not owning the strategy, if they're not owning the implementation and the execution, that's dumb. So if you want to break them out of the dumb leader mold, you've got to break them out of the dumb leader mold, and that may be the way. So the leader has to lead, everyone needs to be accountable along the way, and you've got to align the strategy to what's important for each and every leader. And that's the way that you start to break out of lip service leadership. Thanks for listening to episode 68 of the Dumb Leaders podcast. Once again, don't forget to check out the Dumb Leaders Handbook at dumbleaders.com, where we're building better leaders by sharing the library of lessons that we've got from lousy leaders. Go check it out, dumbleaders.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to join us next time, where once again we're going to explore another dumb leader story. I'll see you then.
Don't mock. I'm not a fool. And people who know me personally know that I am not a fool. But I won't get into the details of those. I just want people to realize that I'm not a fool. Don't mock. I'm not a fool. Don't mock. I'm not a fool.